He said we like to keep things clean, but what he really meant was he would watch me until I broke. This all starts a couple of months ago, right after my divorce finalized. I'm 34, name's Jeremy Gardner, and after everything fell apart with my marriage, I just wanted to get out. Clean break, new place, new job, new everything. I found a small one-bedroom apartment in a squat little complex outside Pittsburgh. Nothing fancy, just beige walls, narrow hallways, and that faint smell of stale coffee that never seems to go away. Rent was affordable, and it was close enough to the new data center where I'd just started working the night shift. I moved in on a damp Tuesday. I remember because my box spring got caught in the stairwell, and this random neighbor who was walking his dog didn't even stop, just watched me struggle from the landing like it was a Netflix special. That was my first little warning. Then I met Ron. Ron Ellis lives in the unit right next to mine. His door is almost always cracked open, and he's got this little ceramic frog on his welcome mat that says, "Hop on in," which feels like a lie because the guy's about as welcoming as a parking ticket. He came out the first time I was unlocking my door, still holding a lamp in one hand and a bag of takeout in the other. He's tall, maybe 6'1", with a white buzz cut and a face like someone who's been squinting at the sun too long. Wore a tucked-in polo and khakis like he was perpetually heading to a HOA meeting, which, I would later learn, was exactly right. "New tenant?" he asked. His voice was clipped, almost like he was reading from a script. Yeah, just moved in," I replied, trying to smile. "Jeremy." He didn't take my hand when I offered it. Just nodded once, slow and deliberate, like he was measuring me up for something I hadn't agreed to yet. Then he said the words that have been echoing in my head ever since. "We like to keep things clean around here." That's it. No, "Welcome to the building." No, "Let me know if you need anything." Just that sentence. And then he turned around and went back inside like he'd done his civic duty and could now get back to judging people from behind his blinds. At first, I tried to write it off. Maybe he's just old school, a little stiff. But then the notes started. The first one was taped to my door 3 days after I moved in. It was handwritten, cursive, signed R.E., and said, "Please refrain from dragging furniture after 10 p.m. Some of us have responsibilities in the morning." I work nights. The only time I was dragging anything was when I came home at 7 a.m. and moved a shelf from the hallway to my living room. But sure, okay. I ignored it. Then came the second note. "Kindly keep your balcony free of clutter." The HOA has standards. Clutter meaning the single camp chair and potted basil plant I'd set out to try and have one calm moment before heading into work. I'd never even seen an HOA around here, and the complex manager didn't mention anything about it in the lease. Turns out, Ron isn't just the neighbor. He's the chairman of the Self-Appointed Homeowners Association. Even though this is technically a rental complex and not a gated suburb, the guy goes around once a week with a clipboard, jotting things down like he's running a crime scene. I saw him do it once from my car, peeking out between my windshield wipers while I let the engine idle. He paused at every door like he was mentally ranking each resident from acceptable to needs purging. I tried to stay out of his way. I'm not a confrontational guy. But one night, maybe 2 weeks in, I came home from work and saw him literally hosing off the sidewalk in front of my door. I'm not kidding. Like power washing the concrete because, according to him, someone had tracked in dirt from the communal parking lot. He didn't say hello that time. Just looked up from the hose, gave me a once-over, and said, "You'll want to be more mindful." I stood there for a second, still in my badge and hoodie, smelling like server room dust and old vending machine coffee, trying to figure out if he was real or some sort of grumpy hallucination conjured by lack of sleep. Since then, it's only gotten weirder. I hear him through the walls sometimes. Not talking, just pacing. Back and forth like a metronome, slow and steady. The creak of his floorboards like a clock ticking down to some petty judgment. And when I step outside, there's a good chance I'll hear the click of blinds snapping shut just a little too fast. This is just the beginning, I know it. I haven't even told you what happened with the Christmas lights or the recycling bin or the great laundry room incident. But that first week, when he said, "We like to keep things clean around here," that wasn't a greeting. That was a warning, and I should have listened. The email hit my inbox like a passive-aggressive slap. Subject line in all caps, "HOA violation, waste disposal timing." I was standing in my tiny kitchen, microwaving leftover General Tso's from the 7-Eleven down the road, when I saw it. Thought it was spam at first, or maybe some boilerplate update about fire code compliance or some other boring thing that didn't concern me. But no, it was addressed to me specifically, with my full name and unit number spelled out in bold. Apparently, according to the bylaws, which, by the way, I never signed or received because again, I'm renting, not owning, I had placed my garbage can at the curb 13 minutes earlier than the permitted time window, which starts at 7 p.m. sharp every Wednesday. 13 minutes. They wrote it out like it was some cardinal sin. Per Article 2, Section 4 of the Community Cleanliness Code, Residents may not place receptacles on the curb prior to 7 p.m. Any violation may result in a fine. No fine yet. But the threat was baked into the wording, polite like a knife wrapped in a napkin. At first, I actually laughed. Thought it was ridiculous. I mean, 13 minutes? Who even notices something like that? But the more I stared at the email, the less funny it got. I could almost picture Ron standing at his window, arms crossed, phone in hand, counting down the minutes like he was running air traffic control for trash bins. The man probably had a spreadsheet titled Jeremy Violations, with timestamps and weather conditions noted just for flavor. I didn't respond to the email, just deleted it, and went back to my reheated dinner, muttering to myself about how some people clearly needed hobbies. But I should have known that wasn't the end of it. That was just the warm-up. 3 days later, I found another note taped to my windshield. Same handwriting as the ones on my door, but this time it was written on official HOA letterhead. How Ron got his hands on that, I don't know, but it made the message feel more legitimate than it deserved. It read, "Vehicle is parked 2 inches beyond designated space line. Please be mindful of others' parking availability. Future occurrences may be subject to towing." 2 inches. I got out of the car, bent over, and looked. My back left tire was maybe an inch over the faded white line. The next car wasn't even close. There was more than enough space between my bumper and the spot next to me. But there it was in black ink on white paper, another warning. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. There were 6 other cars in the lot that evening, and at least 2 of them were parked way more crooked than I was. One guy with a red Ford Escape always backed in like he was aiming for the middle of 3 spots and just gave up halfway. But none of them had notes. Just me. And I didn't have to guess who had written it. Ron had made it personal. I tried to keep calm. Told myself it was just a power-hungry retiree playing pretend hall monitor. But it got to me. I started second-guessing everything. Where I parked, how loudly I closed my car door, whether my shoes made too much noise on the stairs when I came home at 3 in the morning. And then it happened again. I was unlocking my apartment one night after a long shift. My back was sore from sitting too long, my eyes dry from staring at server logs for 8 straight hours, and all I wanted was to collapse on the couch and pass out in front of the TV. But just as I turned the key, I heard it. That unmistakable click of blinds snapping shut, just like they had the first night I met him. And then the noise complaint. It came via email, same tone, same format, different offense. A report of suspicious activity/noise was filed regarding your unit on Thursday morning at approximately 3:07 a.m. Please be reminded that loud entrances and unnecessary disturbances violate our quiet hours agreement 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Repeat offenses may result in disciplinary action or further investigation. Suspicious activity. That's what they called me walking into my own damn home after work. No one else in the complex worked nights. Most of them were retired or worked normal 9-to-5 jobs. The parking lot was always dead silent by 10 p.m., and the stairwells echoed like old tombs. So yeah, my keys jingled a bit. Maybe the door closed a little hard. But suspicious activity? What did they think I was doing, breaking into my own unit with a badge still clipped to my belt? That was the moment I knew it wasn't just overzealous rule following. Ron was watching me. Actively. Obsessively. Reporting every minor misstep like he was building a case against me in some imaginary neighborhood court. And the worst part? He had the infrastructure to do it. The notes, the emails, the HOA header that made it look official. He wasn't just some bitter old man yelling at clouds. He had a title. He had authority. And he was using it to make my life a slow, meticulous hell. I started checking my front door for notes before I even put my key in the lock. I parked a full foot inside the lines, sometimes getting out twice to double-check. I set an alarm for garbage night just so I wouldn't make the same mistake again. And through it all, I felt those eyes on me. Like Ron was always watching. Always waiting. And he was. It was just after 9 when I heard the knock. Not the casual kind either. The heavy, purposeful knock that tells you it's not a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. I was still in my sweats, sipping lukewarm coffee, trying to ignore the way the hum of the fridge sounded too loud in the otherwise silent apartment. My body was still unwinding from the overnight shift, and I wasn't exactly thrilled to be dragged to the door before I could even finish breakfast. I cracked it open, expecting maybe a package delivery screw-up, and instead found 2 uniformed officers standing there. One of them stepped forward a little, hand resting lightly near his belt. "Jeremy Gardner?" "Yeah," I said, confused but trying to keep my voice steady. "What's this about?" "We received a call about a possible suspicious interaction outside your unit early this morning," the taller one said. "A neighbor reported an unfamiliar vehicle parked outside and said something was passed through your window." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" They didn't laugh or shrug it off like it was clearly a mistake. They just looked at me like they were waiting for me to confess to something I hadn't even heard about until that second. I stepped aside and motioned them in. I could feel my heart thudding against my ribs, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I knew exactly who was behind this. Ron. Of course it was Ron. They stood in my living room while I pulled up the footage from the small video intercom system I'd had installed after the second noise complaint. It wasn't fancy, just a basic door cam that showed the street and a decent chunk of the sidewalk. I scrolled through the timeline and found the moment they were talking about. A little after 4 in the morning, right when I'd gotten home. The unfamiliar car? That was my buddy Zach's. He'd pick me up after work because my own car had a flat. The suspicious exchange. I leaned out the window and grabbed a protein bar and an energy drink from him before he took off. That was it. No drugs. No secret handoffs. Just a tired guy getting his caffeine fix from a friend who didn't feel like coming upstairs. I showed them the footage. They leaned in and watched the whole thing in silence. One of them nodded slowly. The other rubbed the back of his neck and let out a breath through his nose like he already knew this was a waste of their time, but had to follow through anyway. All right, the taller one said finally. Looks like everything checks out. Sorry to bother you, Mr. Gardner. Was it Ron? I asked, even though I already knew. They didn't answer, not directly. Just gave each other a look that might as well have been a confirmation. If you have any concerns about harassment or if this continues, you're within your rights to file a report, the other officer said, more gently now. Let us know if it becomes a pattern. It was a pattern. I didn't say anything else. Just thanked them and closed the door behind them as politely as I could manage. Then I sat down on the edge of my couch and stared at the floor for a long time. My coffee had gone cold. My stomach felt like it was full of lead. It wasn't even the police visit that rattled me. It was the idea that Ron was willing to call the authorities over something that dumb. That he'd taken his little vendetta to the next level. That he'd weaponized his paranoia. And the thing is, he didn't even have the decency to be subtle about it. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to grab the mail, and there he was, standing by his garden hose, pretending to water a bush that hadn't grown in months. His eyes followed me like searchlights. No greeting. No acknowledgement. Just this smug little flicker at the corner of his mouth, like he was daring me to say something. Like he knew what he'd done and was waiting to see if I'd break. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. I walked back to my place without saying a word. Didn't even look in his direction. That was the day I stopped pretending this was just a grumpy neighbor with too much time on his hands. That was the day I realized I wasn't just dealing with someone annoying. I was dealing with someone dangerous. Someone who thought rules and order gave him the right to control everything around him, and who wouldn't stop until he'd pushed me out or boxed me in completely. And if the police weren't enough to scare him off, I had no idea what would. A week after the police showed up at my door, I got another email from the HOA. This one didn't bother with the usual fake politeness or passive-aggressive warnings. It was blunt, almost sterile in tone, like someone trying to legally distance themselves from the weight of what they were about to say. The subject line was Notice of Behavioral Review and Community Vote. It started off with some boilerplate nonsense about maintaining a safe and peaceful environment, and then dropped the bomb. There would be a formal vote to determine whether my lease should be revoked due to ongoing violations of community rules and conduct expectations. No specific rule was listed. No incident cited. Just a vague summary claiming I'd engaged in behavior that has disrupted the cohesion and safety of the residential complex. I read it twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of the wording. It sounded like something out of a bad movie, like I was being kicked out of some secret society for daring to speak during a ceremony. I emailed the property manager immediately, demanding to know what the hell this was. She responded 3 days later with a line about the HOA's autonomy to initiate disciplinary processes in coordination with the board's discretion. No clarification, no acknowledgement of my previous questions, and no mention of who had started this process, though I didn't need a name to know it was Ron. I could feel it happening, the way the tone around the building had shifted. People who used to nod when they passed me on the stairs suddenly stopped making eye contact. Conversations would go quiet when I walked through the courtyard. The woman from 1B, who once asked me to help carry her groceries upstairs, now locked her door as soon as she saw me coming. I heard whispers on my way to the laundry room. That's him. The guy from the meeting. I heard he deals stuff through the window. Like high school rumors, but filtered through dentures and early bird special paranoia. Ron had clearly done his rounds. He wasn't stupid. He knew how to stir up just enough fear to turn confusion into suspicion. I overheard one of the older residents, a guy named Hal who walks with a cane and always smells like cough drops, telling someone on the bench outside the rec center that that new guy had been seen with suspicious visitors late at night, and people who don't live here coming and going. Another woman chimed in about all the strange deliveries I supposedly received. It didn't matter that the only thing I ever got delivered was groceries and the occasional Amazon package. Ron had given them the script, and they were happy to read their lines. When I tried to confront him about it, not aggressively, just calmly, in broad daylight near the mailboxes, he didn't flinch. He just stood there in his pressed polo shirt and windbreaker, watching me with this blank look like I was a kid throwing a tantrum at the checkout aisle. "I'm not the one making the decision," he said, folding his arms. "The community decides what's best for itself." That sentence stuck with me for days. The community. As if I wasn't part of it anymore. As if I never had been. I asked for access to the meeting where all of this was supposedly discussed, thinking maybe I could at least hear what was said about me, see the notes, maybe even figure out what lies were being told in my absence. The request was denied. They cited privacy guidelines and internal confidentiality measures, which felt like a convenient way to say you're not welcome here. I wasn't even told where the meeting would be held, just that a vote would take place at the next scheduled HOA assembly, and that residents would be advised accordingly. No chance to defend myself. No formal accusation to respond to. Just vague character assassination wrapped in bureaucratic nonsense. It made me paranoid. I started checking my front door every morning like I expected to find an eviction notice pinned there with a rusted nail. Every knock, every footstep in the hallway, made my stomach clench. My apartment, this little space that I tried to turn into a fresh start, no longer felt like mine. It felt like a waiting room before a verdict I wasn't allowed to appeal. And all of it, every bit of this silent campaign, started with one man who didn't like the way I put out my trash. Ron had made me the villain in some delusional crusade to protect the neighborhood, and now the others had joined in. Not because they had proof, not because they knew anything about me, but because fear is easy to spread, especially when it comes in the shape of a well-pressed old man with a clipboard and a polished smile. And I was running out of places to stand. It started with the packages. At first, I figured it was just bad luck or a lazy delivery driver who didn't bother to ring the bell. I'd get the Amazon notification, delivered, front door, but when I got home, there was nothing there. A bag of protein powder one week, a box of socks the next, then an HDMI cable. Nothing big, nothing that screamed theft, just the kind of stuff that disappears without making a sound. I didn't think much of it until I realized it was only happening to me. Neighbors got their stuff fine. I even started paying attention, watching from my kitchen window whenever I was home during the day. Saw the UPS guy drop off a giant box for the woman in 3C. Left it on her doormat, unbothered. It sat there for 3 hours until she came out to get it. My stuff? Gone within the hour. Like clockwork. I tried to be rational about it. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe someone else was getting hit too and just hadn't noticed. Then came the motorcycle. It's nothing fancy, just a beat-up old Honda CB 500 I picked up off Craigslist a few years back. Gets me to work when I don't feel like dealing with the bus. I keep it parked right by the steps, tucked between two shrubs, barely visible from the street. I came out one morning, helmet in hand, and found it tipped over onto the concrete. The right mirror was shattered, the clutch lever bent back like someone had grabbed it and yanked it just for the hell of it. Scratches ran down the side of the tank like claws. At first I thought maybe it was an accident. Maybe someone knocked it over moving furniture or doing yard work. But the placement made no sense. You'd have to deliberately walk into that corner, squeeze past the bush, and then push. I called the HOA, asked if there were any cameras near the stairwell or the lot. The woman who answered, same one who had been copy-pasting emails at me for weeks, said, "We don't have surveillance on that side of the complex. Unfortunately, we're not responsible for personal property left outside." I asked if any residents had seen anything. She just repeated the same line. 2 days later, my car got keyed. Deep, jagged lines across the passenger door, as if someone had dragged a nail down it in one slow motion. I stood there in the parking lot staring at it like it would explain itself. It hadn't been there the night before. It was still warm from the morning sun, and I could see the dust clinging to the scratches like fresh wounds. And just like the bike, there was no note, no witness, no apology. I reported it. Again, same response, no cameras. You can file a police report if you want, but we can't guarantee any results. That's when I started asking around. I wasn't looking for a witch hunt. I just wanted someone, anyone, to say they'd seen something. Maybe a kid messing around. Maybe someone looking suspicious near the parking lot. But every person I talked to just shook their head, smiled a little too tightly, and said, "Sorry, haven't noticed anything." Like they were afraid to even talk to me. Like my bad luck might rub off if they stood too close. It all felt too targeted to be random. Too convenient to be coincidence. And every time I looked out my window, I saw him. Ron. Sitting on his patio with that same expressionless face, watering a patch of grass that hadn't grown since spring. Watching. Always watching. Then, by sheer accident, I found out about the camera. It was late one evening, and I was walking to the laundry room when I saw Ron fiddling with something on the side of his unit. It was mounted just above his back window, tucked under the roofline, barely visible unless you were standing right underneath it. A small, black dome camera aimed directly at my yard. My doorstep, my parking spot, the corner where my bike had been tipped. All of it in view. I stopped cold. He didn't say anything, just looked over his shoulder and smiled that same tight, insincere smile he always used. "Evening," he said. "You have a camera pointed at my unit?" "Just keeping an eye on my property," he said, still messing with the wiring. "Standard security. Nothing illegal about it." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, watching him like I'd never seen him before. Like something finally clicked. Because now I knew. It wasn't just paranoia. He was watching. He was keeping track. He had seen what happened to my bike. He'd probably seen whoever took my packages, if it wasn't him doing it himself. He had the footage, and he was sitting on it like it was his personal collection of leverage. I called the HOA again, asked them directly if they knew Ron had a private camera aimed at my unit. This time, they gave me a different answer. "We can't comment on the personal security systems of residents," they said. "As long as it doesn't violate community guidelines, we don't intervene." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. At that point, I stopped hoping for help. I stopped waiting for someone to step in or take my side. I started parking 2 blocks away just to keep my car safe. I rerouted all my packages to a locker at the Walgreens across town. I unplugged my bike battery and wheeled it into my living room every night like it was made of gold. Because if Ron was trying to scare me into leaving, it was working. And the worst part? He didn't need to break any laws to do it. Just needed time, and silence, and a community that looked the other way. I kept my tools in a beat-up old metal cabinet at the back of the garage. Nothing special, just a cheap socket set, a power drill, a few wrenches and screwdrivers, the kind of stuff you accumulate over the years when you've got a motorcycle that never runs quite right and a landlord who thinks "fix it yourself" is a valid maintenance strategy. I wasn't in the habit of checking it every day, but one night I needed to tighten a bolt on my handlebars and noticed something off. The top drawer was slightly open. That was the first thing. Then I noticed the empty space. A whole tray missing. My drill was gone too. I stood there with my hands on my hips, staring at it for a good minute, trying to convince myself I'd loaned it out or maybe misplaced it. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. That drawer was full last week. Now it was stripped bare. I checked the garage door. Locked. No signs of a break-in. Nothing obviously forced. But the lock was old. You could probably jimmy it open with a butter knife and some patience. Later that night, I was scrolling through Facebook Marketplace on my phone, just killing time, when I saw it. Same drill. Same damn scratches on the casing near the trigger from when I dropped it last winter. Listed under the name Ryan Ellis. The last name hit me first. Then I clicked the profile. It was him, Ron's kid. Or maybe grandson, I wasn't sure. Some lanky teenager I'd seen around the complex now and then, usually on a skateboard, always with that smug suburban boredom that makes boys think they're invincible. He was selling the entire set. Drill, charger, bit case, and the exact socket tray I was missing, still in the same cracked plastic organizer. I took screenshots, sent them to the police non-emergency line along with a short statement about the missing tools and the online listing. A patrol officer called me back the next day, said they'd look into it, and asked if I'd confronted the kid. I said no, I hadn't spoken to anyone. I was trying to go through the proper channels. That night, around 8 p.m., there was a knock at my door. Not the police. A process server handed me a manila envelope and walked off before I could even process what was happening. Inside was a copy of a police report filed by none other than Ronald Ellis, accusing me of threatening him with violence. I read the statement twice. According to Ron, I'd confronted him in the parking lot the day before, shouted obscenities at him, made vague but serious threats about making him pay, and allegedly took a step toward him in a menacing posture before storming off. None of it happened. I hadn't even seen the man in 3 days. But there it was, signed, dated, and now legally on record. The summons wasn't criminal, yet. It was a formal warning, part of a harassment complaint. But the implications were obvious. If I retaliated, if I so much as raised my voice, I was giving him the case he needed to paint me as unstable, dangerous, a threat to the community. Exactly the narrative he'd been crafting since day one. I called the same officer I'd spoken to earlier, the one who said they'd look into the theft, told him about the new complaint. His tone shifted immediately. Well, if there's a dispute between neighbors, we try to avoid escalating the situation. If you feel you're being harassed, you can file a counterclaim, but I'd suggest keeping your distance and letting us handle the investigation. So I did. I kept my distance. I didn't reply to the Facebook listing, didn't message the kid. I didn't confront Ron or mention the missing tools again. I went to work, I came home, I locked my doors, and I waited. Waited to see if they'd actually do something about the stolen property. Waited to see if this would blow over. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. This wasn't just about tools. This was about setting a trap. Ron wanted me to lash out. He wanted me to make a mistake. And he was using every inch of leverage he had, his name, his title, his influence, even his own family, to push me to the edge. And he was doing it well. I hadn't slept in over 30 hours when it happened. My nerves were shot. My stomach felt like it was trying to chew through itself, and my brain had been running in circles so long I wasn't sure where one thought ended and the next began. I'd worked a double shift covering for someone who called out last minute, then came home to find another passive-aggressive flyer stuffed in my mailbox, another HOA reminder about proper trash bin placement. Like that was still the biggest threat around here. Like I hadn't already lost my sense of peace and security one slow paper cut at a time. I sat in my kitchen with the lights off and just stared at the floor. I couldn't even bring myself to take off my shoes. I thought about the scratches on my car, the packages that never showed up, the dent in my bike tank that still hadn't buffed out. I thought about the way everyone looked at me now, like I was radioactive, like I was something they wanted scrubbed out of their little beige complex. I thought about Ron, sitting smug in his unit every night, watching me through that camera like I was a lab rat. I didn't make a plan. I wasn't thinking like that. It was closer to instinct. Or maybe desperation pretending to be justice. The transformer box was behind the maintenance shed, past the back fence where no one ever went. I knew that because I used to take a shortcut through there on my way to the bus stop, and once I saw the maintenance guy pop it open to cut the juice to the laundry room during a leak. I remembered how he did it. Simple latch, a switch, nothing fancy. It wasn't like I was trying to hurt anyone. I just wanted Ron to feel it for once. To sit in the dark. To be reminded that other people have limits. I told myself it was symbolic, like flipping off the world with a circuit breaker. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I slipped outside just before 2 a.m., hoodie up, gloves on. The air was cold and wet, the kind of night where sound travels in weird ways and every leaf crack sounds like a shout. I kept to the shadows. My heart was thumping so loud I could barely hear myself think. When I reached the box, I hesitated for a second, just long enough to feel the weight of what I was doing. Then I opened it. The switch was stiff, but it gave. I didn't hear anything dramatic, just a mechanical thunk, like a light switch on steroids. I waited. No sirens. No alarms. Just silence. I started to back away, already turning over what I'd say if someone noticed. Must have been an outage. Maybe a raccoon. Anything but the truth. I was halfway across the lot when I heard it. This low popping sound, then a buzz, then this high-pitched whine that felt like it sliced right through my teeth. I turned just in time to see a flash behind one of the utility poles. A snap, then orange. A barn, one of the old storage units 2 houses down, caught fire. Not an explosion. Not flames shooting into the sky. Just this sudden burst of light, followed by smoke rising like a ghost out of the night. I froze. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't even run. Just stood there watching something burn that I hadn't meant to touch. I don't know how long I stood there before the sirens came. Someone must have called it in fast. Red and blue started to dance against the walls of the complex, and I ducked behind the hedges, my whole body shaking. I watched the firefighters pull hoses and douse the flames while the barn collapsed in on itself. It didn't even belong to Ron. It wasn't his yard. It wasn't his anything. I didn't mean for any of it to happen. I just wanted to flip the power off for an hour. I didn't even know the circuits connected. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the fire, the smoke, the people waking up to chaos and wondering if they were safe. And me, crouched in the dark with the stench of melting plastic in my nose and the horrible realization that this wasn't self-defense anymore. This was something else. Something worse. Something I couldn't take back. They came for me on a Thursday. 2 officers, no sirens, no drama. Just a quiet knock around lunchtime and a badge held up to the peephole. I already knew what it was about the second I saw them. There's a kind of silence that wraps around you before your life caves in. I opened the door, and the older one asked my name like he didn't already know it. I gave it. He nodded. Told me I was under arrest for suspicion of reckless arson and tampering with public utilities. They cuffed me right there in my doorway. No reading of rights, not at first. Just clipped radio chatter and the soft thud of my heartbeat in my ears. They didn't even let me put on socks. I remember thinking how stupid that was. How cold the floor felt under my bare feet while they led me to the cruiser. At the station, they sat me in a cramped room with peeling paint and a 2-way mirror I couldn't stop staring at. An hour passed, maybe more. Then a detective came in, placed a flash drive on the table like it was a murder weapon, and asked if I recognized what was on it. I didn't answer. He plugged it into a laptop and turned the screen toward me. Ron's camera footage. Grainy, black and white, time-stamped. There I was, hood up, gloves on, crouched behind the maintenance shed. You could see me pop the latch on the transformer. See the flick of my wrist as I pulled the switch. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was worse. It was proof of intent. I didn't try to deny it. I didn't even bother asking how Ron had the footage so quickly when he supposedly wasn't monitoring anyone. The detective didn't care about the why, only the result. A building caught fire, he said flatly. We're lucky no one got hurt. But it could have gone another way. You understand that, right? I nodded. Couldn't do anything else. I didn't even ask for a lawyer at first. I was too tired to be strategic. They let me go after booking in a holding cell overnight, pending trial. My court date would be scheduled, but the damage was already done. The arrest was public. My name was out there. Mugshot, charges, the whole package. By Monday, I'd lost my job. I got the call from HR while sitting in my living room surrounded by half-packed boxes. The voice on the other end sounded polite enough, but there was no hesitation. Effective immediately, your employment at Westcore Systems is terminated due to breach of conduct and violation of internal security protocols. They cited the arrest, the negative attention, and, most crushing, the loss of trust in my ability to handle sensitive infrastructure. They revoked my system access that same afternoon. My badge was deactivated. My credentials stripped. The license I worked for 2 years to get, the one that let me oversee unmanned drone routines inside the facility's restricted bays, was suspended by the state pending a review. Just like that, I was out. Out of a job. Out of a future. Out of the one thing I'd managed to build since the divorce, since starting over. I didn't call anyone. There was no one to call. My phone buzzed for a while. News alerts, a few texts from coworkers who didn't know what to say, one message from my old boss that just said sorry. Then nothing. I sat on the couch that night, staring at the unplugged TV, thinking about the way Ron must have smiled handing over that footage. About how he didn't need to yell or push or vandalize anymore. He'd gotten what he wanted without lifting a finger. He'd painted me into a corner, and I walked straight into it. And the worst part is, he never had to lie. I gave him the ending myself. I did something stupid. Not malicious. Not calculated. But stupid and reckless. And now I was paying for it with everything I had left. And Ron. Ron was still just across the wall, probably sitting by his window, watching the lights in my unit go out one by one. Prison flattens everything. Time. Noise, even your thoughts. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, like watching your reflection in a mirror fog up until there's nothing left but a blur. I got sentenced to 18 months, served a little over 12. Good behavior, overcrowding, the usual levers. But it didn't feel short. It felt like I aged 20 years in there. The first few months I kept replaying everything in my head, over and over, until the details lost their order. The switch, the noise, the smoke, Ron's face, my own hands. I tried to write it all down at one point. Figured maybe it would help clear something up, but it just made it worse. I stopped counting days after week 4. After that, I let the routine take over. Wake up. Avoid the loud ones. Keep your head down. Try not to get caught in anyone else's orbit. Think as little as possible. I didn't expect to hear from anyone. I hadn't gotten mail in 11 months. But 2 weeks before my release, one of the guards dropped a plain envelope on my bunk. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded twice. The handwriting was tight, mechanical, like someone who hadn't written by hand in a while. It said, I told you he wouldn't stop until he broke you. That was the first line. The letter went on to explain that the writer had once lived in the same complex. Said his name was Marcus, though I didn't remember anyone by that name. He wrote that 5 years ago, he'd lived 2 units down from Ron and had clashed with him over a dispute about a backyard fire pit. It started with notes, then the citations, then the police, then an anonymous tip to Child Protective Services about Marcus's parenting. He lost custody of his daughter for almost 6 months before the claim was deemed baseless. By then, his job was gone, his lease revoked, and his name smeared all over the HOA's community bulletin as a disturbance to the neighborhood's harmony. He wrote that he saw my story on the news, recognized Ron's name, and knew how it would end. He doesn't stop, the letter said. He doesn't win by force. He wins because the people around him are too afraid to challenge him. Because nobody wants noise. They want peace, even if it means sacrificing someone else. I must have read that line 10 times. It didn't excuse what I did. I knew that. I never lied about it. I never pretended it was an accident. But it wasn't malice either. It wasn't hatred. It was something quieter, more desperate. When you're backed into a corner long enough, even a bad decision feels like a lifeline. I remember sitting on that thin prison mattress with that letter in my hand, trying to make sense of what the hell any of it meant. And all I could think was how many other problems people like Ron had gotten rid of over the years. How many people had lost jobs, apartments, families, all because someone in a polo shirt with a clipboard decided they were too loud, Too messy, too difficult to control. How the system, the property managers, the HOA, the police, kept siding with him not because he was right, but because he was predictable, because he knew how to wrap his pettiness in protocol. I was guilty. There's no getting around that. I broke the law. I crossed a line. I own that. But guilt doesn't always come first. Sometimes guilt is just the last link in a long chain of people looking the other way. When I walked out of that gate, no one was waiting. I didn't expect them to be. I've got nothing left to go back to anyway. But I keep the letter. I folded it back up and tucked it into the pocket of the only jacket I still own. So that's my story. I'm not proud of how it ended, but I think a lot about how it started. About the way a smile can be a threat. About how power doesn't need to be big to be dangerous. And about how easy it is to ruin a life when everyone agrees it's better to stay quiet than ask questions. Thanks for reading. I've been sitting on this for a long time, and I guess I just needed to get it out. What would you have done? Do you think I was just weak? Or do you think people like Ron get away with it because no one ever really pushes back? Let me know. I've got time.